unborn have a right to life. No Supreme Court justice has ever said that fetuses should be considered constitutional persons. Because that would actually not only overturn Roe v. Wade, it would probably mandate that states criminalize most or all abortions. And most justices are simply, or all justices, are not willing to go to this sort of what they consider one extreme all the way to the other extreme. In fact, I don't know if you remember Hillary Clinton. At one point she gave an interview and she said, look, fetuses don't have constitutional rights. And they said, even right up until the time of birth, and she said, yes, the Supreme Court's decided that. And she got a lot of flack for that. I don't know if you remember that. Another person who said the exact same thing is Antonin Scalia. If you can look this up, in 2008, Antonin Scalia was interviewed by 60 Minutes. And on the tape, in the interview, this is all the way back in 2008, he said, well, he was talking about why he considered himself politically neutral. He said, well, look, my politics don't affect my decision-making. He said, I'm not that, as you know, I'm a pretty conservative guy. But he said, fetuses don't have any rights until they're out of the womb and walking around. Right? So if Antonin Scalia doesn't think that fetuses have constitutional personhood, then nobody does. Right? So this is that's not going to happen. Instead, what they would do is just simply say, we made a mistake and the federal constitution doesn't have anything to say about abortion. And so what does that do? It returns then the regulation of abortion back to states. And then you're going to have political warfare till the end of time. Because you're going to have, now what happens is it's not like when a law is determined to be unconstitutional, they take out a giant eraser and sort of erase it out of the statute book, right? It still exists. It's just sort of enjoined or prevented from being enforced. So there are a lot of states that still have anti-abortion statutes on the books. So if you get rid of Roe v. Wade and Casey, suddenly those statutes, they're alive again, right? They're sort of revived. So you're going to have a number of states that immediately abortion would be illegal, but then you would have a number of states like New York and California where abortion would still be legal because the states are basically pro-choice states. But nonetheless, what's going to happen? Every state that isn't absolutely blue or absolutely red is now going to, every legislative session, have all-out warfare over abortion. Every state election is now going to have, as an added bonus, abortion as an issue. Right? And every election there on out will be the battle to reinstate abortion rights or revoke them again. Back and forth, state by state. And it's possible that some states will say, well, even if the federal constitution doesn't grant us the right of abortion, our state constitution does. So you can take the Roe v. Wade fight and you can just import it into a state constitution. If you do that, now your state judiciaries become even more heated as a site of politics. And a lot of states, and I'll tell you, I'm not really keen on judicial elections, but a lot of states do judicial elections, like Pennsylvania. Now every judicial election will turn into a battle over abortion in that state. So one of the, sort of mistakes you could say, or I should say bad predictions, is that when Justice Blackmun and the other seven members of the court in 1973 said, oh, we're going to create a right of abortion, we're going to announce a right of abortion in the Constitution, they thought, we're settling this issue for all time. And of course, it didn't settle the issue for all time. This isn't going to settle it either. Okay, it's just going to move the site of the conflict out from one court out to 50 state legislatures and 50 judiciaries. Now, what are some of the other effects of the Trump administration on reproductive politics apart from abortion rights? There are a number of different things. And we can talk about any of these that you want. One is what's called the contraception mandate, right? With the Affordable Care Act, which at this point, right, still exists. Affordable Care Act, through regulations, through the Health and Human Services Agency, basically says that that contraception, effective contraception, is a form of preventative care, and women should be able to have that as part of their health care plans for free. So if a woman has a health care plan, she should be able to have access to effective, free abortion. Or not abortion, sorry, contraception. So President Trump, either by repealing or revising the Affordable Care Act, could remove the contraceptive mandate, or, and I'm surprised he hasn't really moved on this now, or President Trump can sign an order saying, executive order saying, Health and Human Services, I want you to examine what preventative services mean, and I'd really like you to think about it not including free contraceptive care. Okay, so he could do that through executive orders, have that review. Planned Parenthood, which is one of the largest providers of family planning, healthcare, and healthcare for poor women in the United States, could be defunded. Now, one of the things that's important to understand about Planned Parenthood is they don't use federal money right now for abortions. That's already prohibited. So when people talk about defunding Planned Parenthood, they're not talking about preventing taxpayer dollars from being used for abortion. Instead, what they're talking about is just removing the federal government's funding of Planned Parenthood altogether. Planned Parenthood has a budget at any given year, or a revenue stream of about $1.2 billion a year. About $500 million of that, between $500 and $550 million, comes from the federal government through reimbursements. So they have Title X family planning programs, and then also its revenue every year. Okay, so that would have an impact. Yes. Would Planned Parenthood not be around to provide abortions? Yes. Would it not be around to provide health care for a lot of women that doesn't involve abortions? Yes. Yes. So you'd have sort of this double effect. The global gag rule. The global gag rule is something that Ronald Reagan created in 1984. He said if we're giving money to non-governmental organizations, in other words, non-profit organizations that exist around the globe, if we're giving money to those organizations to provide health care, they are not permitted to recommend or advocate for abortion as a health care outcome for a woman, and they're not even allowed to advocate for the legalization of abortion in their countries. So you're not allowed to advocate for that. And then, depending on Republican or Democratic president, the gag rule has been in place, or it's been lifted. So under President Obama, he said, we're not doing that anymore. Now, my understanding, President Trump, in January, is one of the first things he did. He reinstituted the global gag rule, but I think it's actually broader than the old gag rule. Not only does it basically prevent foreign NGOs from doing what I just said, it prevents any organization that receives health care money from the federal government. So we're talking sort of going from $600 million to something like $9.5 billion worth of funding around the world, including things like PEPFAR, which is President Bush's, second President Bush's effort to eradicate AIDS. It's now covered under this rule. So if you have a woman that says has AIDS or HIV, and she finds out she's pregnant, now they can't advise her to basically have an abortion or offer her resources for doing that. So the gag rule is back and it's basically expanded. You also might find the government funding what are usually referred to as crisis pregnancy centers, which are usually non-profit organizations that are usually run by most people that are real free diapers and so on, and there's nothing wrong with that. Although sometimes crisis pregnancy centers, there's like a war over information. So they tell women things that I think are not necessarily established in the evidence, like abortion, the procedure itself causes depression, or abortion increases your chance of getting breast cancer, and some other sort of maybe sort of misleading information about abortion. There is a push to, say, take away money from Planned Parenthood and then give it to crisis pregnancy centers. And to say, because one of the arguments against defunding Planned Parenthood is, well, how are people going to get health care if you defund Planned Parenthood? They say, we've got these crisis pregnancy centers that are ready to basically take up the charge. And so you would have sort of a pro-life perspective and also maybe a dollop of the evangelization, Christian evangelization on top of that. The last thing I just want to mention in this regard is school choice. This may seem like it's not really related to abortion, but it's related to reproductive health care. Is that my phone? I terribly apologize. Jeez. If I were my own student, I'd be cheering myself out right now. Nobody calls me on this phone. So, school choice, right? Betsy DeVos, we're talking about school vouchers. The idea that we need to introduce market features into, or market forces on the public school system. It's a monopoly and it's inefficient, and so if you introduce competition in the public school system, it's going to improve the quality of schools. And the way you can do that is through vouchers, right? So students are customers, and so if you don't like your bad public school, here's some money, and you can take it and you go to an alternative school, a non-public school. Most of those alternative schools are Christian schools, right? They're religious schools. So the voucher program is really what it's doing is taking taxpayer dollars and basically subsidizing taking children out of the public school system and putting them in Christian schools. Which, again, there may not be anything wrong with that per se, but I can tell you this, though, the sex education, that is, the sex education curricula of religious schools does not really hold up to scientific scrutiny as actually reducing the amount of sex that kids have, or young people have, and preventing unintended pregnancies. Okay. So if you want to reduce the number of abortions by reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies, and you want to do that by educating people as to effective contraception through effective sex education, then increasing the number of children that leave public school and go to private schools where they get bad sex education or non-scientifically based sex education is counterproductive. But that's one of the things you're probably going to see in something like a President Trump budget. So the last thing I want to mention, and I'll be quick here, is this hearts and minds battle. Okay, so let's say Roe v. Wade is overturned and abortion is returned to the states. And now, again, every election cycle is a battle over abortion. Well, if you're pro-choice or pro-life, it doesn't matter. What your legislators are going to do is based on what their constituents want. And so really what happens is, we get away from just resting on the fact, well, the Supreme Court said there's a right of abortion, so, we don't have to worry about it one way or the other. Now it's up to us as a citizenry to decide what we really think about these things and communicate those to our legislatures. So if you're a pro-choice activist or you're a pro-life activist, you have to think about hearts and minds battles. And the pro-choice movement, the pro-life movement, just to simplify here for a second, they have spent a lot of time thinking about how they can convince people that their position is right. But here's what I would say, that would be intensified, right, if Roe v. Wade is overturned. It's going to be intensified greatly. And so, this is a little more my perspective. I think that pro-choice movement and the pro-life movement each have advantages and disadvantages in terms of convincing people of the rightness of their views. And I would say that the pro-choice movement actually has more disadvantages than advantages. Let me explain that. I'd say that the big advantage for the pro-choice movement when it comes to abortion is self-interest and concrete experience. In other words, context. Right? There are many, many people in this country, many, many women and men, who are pro-life on sort of a surface sense, but would like the option to have an abortion if their life, if something in their life introduces that to them, that they're the challenge that they need to overcome. Okay? There are a lot of stories of abortion doctors who see somebody outside picketing the clinic one day, come in and have an abortion the next day, and then go back and picket 2 days later. Right? So that essentially people realize that life is complicated on the pro-choice side, and that we can have these sort of nice, neat moral categories. Well, this is immoral and this is moral. But when life intrudes, the complications of life intrude, a lot of people, in fact, want the option to have an abortion. And so that's one of the advantages of the pro-choice movement, is that people realize life is complicated, these moral questions are not always easy to answer. But they actually have, I think, 4 distinct disadvantages, okay, pro-choice movement, in terms of convincing people of their view. One is, I think we still have in this country relatively old-fashioned values when it comes to sex and gender. Okay, in other words, underneath sort of the pro-choice view, a lot of people still basically see sex and gender from a relatively old-fashioned frame. So, for example, I think women are still, and we had a discussion about this disagreement, I think women are still basically judged for having sex. It's not necessarily seen as something that is completely natural and the right. Because women will have sex. Right? Most women do have sex, just like most men do have sex. And if you're going to have sex, you're probably going to encounter an unintended pregnancy at one point. 50% of pregnancies in the United States are unintended. Every year, 50%. Okay, so this is a fact of life. It's a fact of life. However, the sole responsibility, we tend to put on women almost the sole responsibility for avoiding being pregnant, and then the consequences of a pregnancy. Right? And this is not just in spite of 2 sexual revolutions in the early 20th century and in the 60s. is actually in part because of the sexual revolution that women now are almost solely responsible for avoiding pregnancy and dealing with the consequences of pregnancy. So this is a difficulty then, because we still see sexual relationships and responsibility for pregnancy in sort of old-fashioned gendered terms. So for example, this is why people would say, having an abortion is murder. A fetus is a person. But if a woman is pregnant as a result of rape, well then it's okay. What, did the fetus suddenly not become a person? Right? What's really driving the person's view then? That the fetus is a person, or that the woman was not responsible for having sex and getting pregnant? Right? So there's an element of judgment there that is antiquated. Second, you still have largely a male-structured workplace and male-structured healthcare. What I mean by that is that we still set up our workplaces as if men are the norm. Men who do not get pregnant and are not the primary caregivers. We don't make it easy. Even now, in 2017, we don't make it easy for women to be pregnant, manage unexpected pregnancies, give birth, take time away from work, and be the primary caregiver. And even just things like breast feeding or breast pumping at work are difficult things. These should not be difficult things, but they're difficult things. So we still have a male-centric workplace. Second, we also have this, again, or I should say in addition, we have male-centric healthcare. In other words, we think of healthcare needs based on the norm of what a man's healthcare needs are. Well, men need X, Y, and Z. But all that women's stuff is extra. Right? If men are your norm for thinking about how you set up the healthcare system, then all the things that women need are considered superfluous or extra. Wait, you want us to include these extra costs? Well, men don't get pregnant, so why should men pay for women's health care? Because you're seeing men as the norm. If women were the standard by which we would judge what is normal health care, we would say with men, well, maybe men every once in a while we get a break, right, financially, but everyone should have basic health care according to what is normal health care. We don't do that, so what we do is we think of women's health care as this kind of extra and almost like a kind of a gift that we give to women. We're going to be nice enough to pay for maternity care. So this is something that, these kind of presuppositions are things that pro-choice people have to deal with. Third thing is that health insurance is seen in this country as a gift, rather than a right or earned. Right? So if we get it from the government, we say, oh, taxpayer, like through Medicare and Medicaid, we say, oh, the government's giving that to you. That's nice. If we thought of it as a right, we wouldn't say, oh, well, the government giving to you is not, that's so special. We would say, well, yes, the government gives it to you because that's what we demand as a society. Everyone should have it. And employers, right, we treat healthcare as a benefit. Well, I'm going to compensate you for your work, but you know what? I'm going to be nice and I'm going to give you some healthcare too. Thank you. You know, that's not free. Right? When employers consider a compensation package, they don't just think about, you know, here's your compensation and here's a lollipop of healthcare. Right? They say the overall cost of hiring you is X. And you've earned every penny, both the salary and the benefits. You've earned those. Now what does that do psychologically for us? If you think of healthcare as a kind of a gift, then the gift giver can place conditions on the gift. If any of you have ever gotten a gift, especially from a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm giving this to you free and clear, but I hope you use it the right way. Right? And if we give somebody a gift and that person misuses the gift, we feel like it's a reflection on our own values. Well, I'm giving you health care, not for abortion and certain types of contraception, because since I'm giving it to you as a gift, if you misuse it, it makes me feel like my values are being violated. Right? Now, if I have a business and I pay you $10 an hour, and you take 10 of those dollars over the course of a day, and you go and purchase condoms with them, I'm not going to say, oh my God, I'm deeply shamed that you took those $10 and spent them on condoms. How can I employ you? It's reflecting on, it's violating my rights of religious conscience. But if we give someone a health care benefit, and we say, you've gone to your doctor, and the doctor says, well, I think you need to have an intrauterine device. Right? Now people are saying, well, wait, that's the health care I'm giving you. So it's reflecting on my values. So this is something pro-choice people have to wrestle with. They need to reframe healthcare as one, either a right. Therefore, if taxpayer dollars go for reproductive health care, it's not seen as something that's reflecting on the taxpayer. And two, it's by the way I use my own health care, which I've earned, just like I've earned myself. Right? But that's not the way we've culturally framed it right now. The last thing is, I think, and if you're pro-choice activists, you might dislike me for saying this, pro-choice activists, I think, largely miss focusing on the fundamentals. Sometimes I think in the pro-choice movement, there's kind of a distaste for talking about the basics of abortion ethics, because almost like to acknowledge it or to talk about it is to give it a kind of a legitimacy. So a lot of times if you look at like pro-choice literature, they want to treat abortion as kind of a settled issue. We're not talking about this anymore. It's a woman's right, it's her body, that's it. And I'm not going to engage you with this sort of flim-flam about, gestational stages and so on. The problem is that you can have a good principle. This is John Stuart Mill, right? A great principle that turns into dogma. The dogma can be well established, but if you kind of forget why you believe in that principle, it's easily knocked over. So one of the things that pro-choice activists don't do well, in my opinion, is talk to people about the fundamentals. This is why abortion is not immoral. This is why we don't think, at a certain point, that the unborn are persons. This is why women have an autonomy right, and how it doesn't violate whatever rights this unborn fetus or child, what have you, has. This is why we shouldn't have criminalization of abortion, right? Talk about the actual fundamentals. Because what happens is people have this sort of self-interest, kind of like sort of a surface belief in abortion, but then what happens is pro-life people come in and sort of hit them with this sort of this shockwave. Look, here's an aborted fetus at 24 weeks, right? Have you ever thought about that? Well, no one's ever talked to me about that. Oh my God. Right? And you can frame that the right way, you can throw people off, throw pro-choice people off the game, right? So, in my opinion, pro-choice activists need to go back to doing what was called apologetics, like really the fundamentals. Okay? Now, pro-life movement is kind of the opposite. Pro-life movement has as an advantage, they're very good at apologetics. And I studied the pro-life movement, so I looked at a lot of their organizations, their websites. They are all about training people to argue for the immorality of abortion. They have high school camps, they have summer camps, they go to colleges, they do trainings. There are several organizations explicitly about training people to make convincing arguments against the morality of abortion. Okay, and this comes out of their history as doing Christian apologetics. We need to convince people why Christianity is real and valid. And so they've taken that sort of apologetics practice and they've moved it into the area of abortion apologetics. So they're very good at that. The thing they're not very good at is the concrete context type stuff that I mentioned. Right? In particular, pro-life activists do not have a good argument for what I call the criminalization question. Right? So if abortion is murder, then women who have abortions are murderers. And if you're assuming that if abortion is immoral, it should be criminalized, then shouldn't the person who's most responsible for ending that pregnancy and committing murder, shouldn't she be put in prison and charged with murder? Pro-life people don't have a good answer for that. Either they say, I don't want to talk about that, I just want to focus on the immorality of abortion. Or they say, well, women are pressured or coerced. Which is rather condescending if you think about it. Right? Women are pressured or coerced into abortion. And it doesn't hold up. If a woman had an abusive boyfriend, and that abusive boyfriend convinced her to kill her 3-year-old child, would people say, we're not going to prosecute you because you were coerced or pressured? Wouldn't we still say, no, you committed murder? Right? So if women have abortions and they're murderers, why aren't they going to prison? Right? Pro-life activists do not have a good answer for that. Okay, in my opinion, they do not have a good answer for that. So tasks for then activists then, pro-choice people have 2 tasks. One, I think they need to focus on the fundamentals. Get back to, here's why we think abortion is not immoral. But also, teach about gender. Right? Because you can tell people all you want about abortion and whether it's moral or immoral, but if that belief is resting on a gendered understanding of the workplace, healthcare, sex, and so on, it's not going to sink down and be effective. Pro-life people, on the other hand, they need to come up with responses to the concrete difficulties that women and men face in their lives that cause them to choose to have abortions. All right, now I want to turn it